You're good. Senator Smith's daughter was here yesterday. We may need her, some young individual to come up here and get this thing working. All my grandkids are at home, so I didn't bring any along. Please turn your cell phone to silence. And before we start, because of this, we have a few new announcements. Welcome to our first Budget Review Subcommittee on Transportation. Due to the continuing issues related to COVID-19, we have some new meeting protocols in place for this 2020 interim. The remote access will be allowed to all meetings for the interim. Members were provided information prior to the meeting on how to access the meeting remotely. No materials will be provided for this meeting. At this time, we will ask committee assistant to please call the roll. And also, members, we need for you to indicate if you are present, if you are remote from district, or if you're remote from the annex. Please call the roll.
Senator Parrott. Senator Webb.
Here from home.
Thank you. Senator Wise. Here. Representative Fugate. Here. Representative Harris. Here. Representative Heverin. Here. Representative Huff. Here. Representative Miller. Representative Rowland. Representative Sims. Senator McDaniel. Representative Reed. Co-Chair Higdon. Chair Santoro.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you.
This morning, we're going to hear from Secretary Gray with the Transportation Cabinet, as well as Robin Brewer, Executive Director for the Office of Budget and Physical Management, and we will provide an overview of the transportation budgeting issues. Please identify yourself for the record as you begin your testimony. Members, please hold all your questions until or after their presentations. At this time, Secretary Gray, please begin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And also Senator Higdon, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I want to say from the outset that, and to all the members of the committee, that I appreciate the access that we have had to both Chairman Santoro and Chairman Higdon in the course of the last several weeks and a couple of months. It's been useful, really useful for us to have the access that we have had to you all. So that's first things first. Second, I want to thank Robin Brewer, our budget director. Robin, as some of you know, is a second generation member of the Transportation Cabinet and a career employee. And I also want to thank Mike Hancock, of course. Mike, former secretary, today deputy secretary, knows this cabinet after 40 years like the back of his hand. He is one of the scholarship students that the cabinet is so proud of, that has been able to replenish the ranks of this cabinet in such a meaningful way over time. That's not my phone, Mr. Chairman. I don't think.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I know I listened to your instruction carefully at the beginning. So let me start. When I've been having conversations about our budget recently, I've started with a couple of stories or an aphorism or two. One is dialing back for me almost 20 years when a guy named Jim Collins wrote a book for business and for really institutions across the board. And that book was called Good to Great. And the book actually talked about leading companies and the characteristics of those leading companies in terms of their leadership and the spirit and the attitude. And it gave a number of suggestions about how to create those leading institutions. And I think it applies, one especially applies today as we're dealing with our budget and the shortfalls that we're contemplating, that we're addressing. And in that, Jim Collins said that the great companies are the ones that acknowledge the brutal facts of their current reality. The ones that acknowledge the brutal facts of their current reality. So that's what big part of what we're going to be addressing today. And I'm going to start out with it, and then Robin will double down on those brutal facts. And she's very, very effective at that. And she does it with a smile, and we all appreciate that. And then when we have questions, as I said, we're fortunate to have Mike Hancock with us, and we will tag team on any questions that, of course, that you all have for us. I want to say from the outset that in developing the budget that we've operated with so far, Governor Beshear recognized from that outset that transportation is a vital, a key to the economy and therefore the life of our Commonwealth. And for that, we appreciate everything that he did in helping us develop the budget. Now, it's no secret that since Healthy to Work and the COVID-19 pandemic, that there have been significant adjustments that we've made. And those adjustments have frankly had a severe impact on the road fund. Road fund receipts, some of you know this, but let me just reiterate it, and Robin will punctuate it as well. Road receipts for April dropped by 30.1%. That is year to year, April of 2019, April of 2020. And that means we are down, that translates in absolute numbers to that we're down 43.9 million from roughly 150 million in 2019, 1 year before. Now, it's obvious that motor vehicle traffic of all kinds has been in steep decline. Our automated traffic counters showed numbers dropping all across the state. Road fund, as you know, is based on user fees and mainly the taxes on sales of motor fuels and motor vehicles and the fees that we receive on vehicle licensing and registration. And with the pandemic, motor fuel sales, those associated with gasoline, dropped significantly. Very few cars and trucks were being sold as well. And I'll come back to that in just a minute, because that has perhaps even a longer term impact. Now I want to talk about, the next two things I want to talk about are actions that we've taken at the Transportation Cabinet. And then I want to talk about looking ahead, a forward look to the horizon. So the actions that we've taken at KYTC, at the Transportation Cabinet, actually did not start with the pandemic. We were seeing some evidence of cash flow challenges as early as December and January. And that's when we began focusing on responsible cash management. The goal being to have adequate funds available during the high construction season in the summer months, having adequate funds available to fund our major projects to get us through that period. Now, since the pandemic emerged, we saw that cash model being more compromised, more challenged. And what have we done? Well, two things that we've done direct specifically and more, but let me talk about a couple of things first. And both of these involve working with our industry partners. And that means the contractors, the highway contractors, the paving contractors, as well as consultants across the board. And remember the economic impact of work. I know you all understand it very well, but when you think not only the 4,300 employees directly employed by the Transportation Cabinet, but all the employees that are employed by the contractors in the Transportation's highway program every single day, every single year. Now, what do? Well, we had to cancel our contract lettings in May and June. I'll come back to that as well in terms of what we're looking at going forward. We needed to suspend nearly 100 paving contracts. That totals roughly $58 million. Now, what do I mean by suspend? The contracts have not been canceled. In fact, the contractors working with the contractors, most of them have chosen to continue with the projects at a staged level and have indicated their willingness to accept payments later in the year, in the fall. Now, we're still working through a lot of the details on this, but that's the framework. And fortunately, there's been precedent for this. In 2016, had a similar condition and similar situation. But I just want to thank the trade and the professional associations for their work with us and the industry partners in the construction and the asphalt industries. And we've also made some adjustments in our maintenance program. That includes the mowing program. The right-of-way mowing has been adjusted down somewhere between 10%. But of course, we all know that we have constituent expectations there, and we've got to be mindful of those expectations. Now, let me move toward looking ahead. We expect our pavement contracts to resume once revenues stabilize. That's what I meant by earlier when I said we're looking to stage the reentry of the paving contract. We also expect that our major projects, and this is important, our major projects in the highway program, we are continuing. This has been a focus of our strategy, is to ensure that we have the cash available on hand in the cabinet to support the program. Now, of course, we're hoping to see some encouraging signs in terms of motor fuels and motor vehicle sales in May and June numbers. And that, we hope, will permit us to have a letting in July. And one of the wrinkles in this, and Robin may mention this too, and I've gotten this information anecdotally, frankly, from friends in the industry, in the automotive industry, but automotive sales are not just a function of demand by the consumers, but it's also a function of the supply chain. And supply chain among the OEMs, the automotive makers, and their suppliers has been challenged and compromised in the last couple of months. So ramping that back up and actually getting vehicles available to the dealers is a challenge, and therefore something that we must anticipate and plan for. Now, I want to say, folks have often asked me, Representative Santoro, Mr. Chairman, you asked me, well, what is it that we can do? And I think I said to you, and I know I said to Senator Higdon, because he said yesterday that he'd done it. I said, well, reach out to our Washington delegation and let them know that these numbers won't just automatically come back on us. As far as the numbers for May, for April, May, and what happens in June, March, April, May, June, they won't automatically come back on us. And this is why we need help in order to maintain the program. The House has passed, of course, an action that called for $15 billion in proposed funding for transportation. AASHTO, the American Association of State Transportation Organizations, officials, has recommended as much as $50 billion. That's 5-0. So it's 1-5 versus 5-0. And the 1-5, I would say, listening to my counterparts across the country, other secretaries of transportation, commissioners of transportation, and so forth, they all have almost the identical challenges that we have right here in Kentucky. So everyone is in the same boat, so to speak. Now, in terms of going forward, acknowledging this tough time, these unprecedented times, what we're doing, we're continuing to work with Budget Director John Hicks, and I believe, and I'm not believe, but I'm sure of that he's going to be appearing before an interim committee today himself. And we've been working with John, with Director Hicks and his team, and the governor to make responsible adjustments going forward that will meet the consensus forecasting group's revenue estimates. And as you all may know, that revenue estimate is that we will be down roughly between 10 and 11%. Robin will go into that in more detail. And that's roughly a number of $160 million on our roughly $1.6 billion anticipated road revenues. So that, Mr. Chairman, is my introduction. And if it's all right with you, then I'll ask Budget Director Robin Brewer to pick up.
Please do, sir. Robin, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll start by just saying, as everyone knows, COVID-19 has impacted everyone's lives in some form or fashion. It's also impacted the economy greatly, and the road fund is no exception to that. Coronavirus has impacted virtually all aspects of the road fund revenues, from declining motor fuel tax revenues due to businesses closing temporarily and consumers practicing healthy at home directives, to declining motor vehicle usage tax revenues due to the auto dealerships closing to in-person traffic and exclusively doing business through online sales, and also to declining collection of various fees and licenses due to the circuit clerk's offices, county clerk offices, and KYTC offices either being closed or closed to in-person traffic. Which all of these were actions that have been needed to deal with a global pandemic. So April was the first month's revenues where we began to see the finance of COVID-19 to the road fund. Overall, like the Secretary said, road fund receipts fell 30.1% in April, with total collections of $101.7 million, which was $43.9 million less than what was collected at the same time last fiscal year. Year-to-date collections stood at negative 1.4%. Within some of the specific accounts, our motor fuel tax revenues fell 11.8% in April. Motor fuel tax revenues do lag a month behind, so April's revenues actually reflect March activity. So because of that, we won't really see the full impact on our motor fuel tax set revenues until we see May's receipts. Motor vehicle usage tax receipts fell 60.1% in April, based on the fact that, like I said earlier, our auto dealerships were very limited to just online sales. And our overall license and privilege receipts decreased 20.2% for April. So May's revenues have not been finalized yet, but those should be known and released publicly by the Office of the State Budget Director in the coming days. And that will help us determine the evolving budgetary impact on the road fund for fiscal year 2020. So with upcoming anticipated budget shortfalls for the general fund and the road fund, the Consensus Forecasting Group, or CFG, met on May 22nd to discuss the economic impacts of COVID-19 to the state revenues for fiscal year 2020. From that meeting, the CFG adopted the pessimistic scenario for the road fund, which resulted in a revision of the enacted road fund revenue estimate for fiscal year 2020, down from $1,551,800,000 to $1,390,000,000, which is an estimated budget shortfall of $161.8 million, or a 10.4% shortfall for fiscal year 2020. The revised official estimate is forecasting $77 million less in motor fuel tax revenue, which is a 10% reduction. Since motor fuel tax is used to statutorily formulate the amount of county road aid and municipal road aid through our revenue sharing programs, a similar reduction would be anticipated in aid to the cities and the counties for the year. In addition, the revised estimate calls for $60.5 million less in our motor vehicle usage tax revenue, which is an 11.7% reduction from the enacted estimate. The estimate calls for $9.9 million less in weight distance tax revenue, which is an 11.8% reduction. $3.1 million less in motor vehicle operators revenue, which is an 18.1% reduction, and $9.7 million less in motor vehicle licensing revenue, 8.4% reduction. Overall, the revised official revenue estimate would be about 11.2% less in revenue compared to actual FY19 road fund revenue. And with this revised revenue estimate, road fund collections would be back to between fiscal year 2011 and 2012 levels. With very few weeks remaining in the fiscal year to address the budget shortfall, the Cabinet is working with the State Budget Director's Office and the Governor's Office on the best approach for a plan. But like COVID-19, the financial situation is evolving, and it will continue to evolve as the impact from the reopening of the economy unfolds. So the budgetary impact for this fiscal year as well as next fiscal year will really just be better known with time. And I just, again, want to remind the committee, like the Secretary mentioned earlier, the situation is changing basically daily. It's a very fluid situation. We're doing the best we can to plan with what we know, but we also are going to have to be able to be flexible and react as we know more information and as we see things evolve. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and we'll attempt to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Very good. I would go through the rules here in a few minutes. I just want to make a comment. I want everyone to understand that we did not, or the Secretary did not cancel any contracts. They're just suspended for now. And it's great that our contractors agreed to some delayed payments. I understand that. And I think in the next few months, we're going to find out a little bit better about this $160 million shortfall. So actually, a few months away before we get some new numbers in. So I just want to make that comment. For those members with questions, we'll take questions from members that are present here first. Then we'll members participating remotely, and if anyone had any questions that come in. Senator McDaniel, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, can you hear me now? Okay, some of the chairs don't have mics. So two things. First of all, I've gotten a little bit of feedback from the engineering community up home that transportation is not doing traffic count reviews right now for new developments. Can you comment on that at all, or is there someone that they could get in contact with? Because I'm beginning to get some feedback that some of the economic growth is being impeded by that. Mr. Secretary, we can't hear you. Maybe that's on purpose, but.
Did you mute? We cannot hear you, sir.
I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Forgive me.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Listen, good humor goes a long way, especially in these times. I was going to say that if you could read my lips, I'm unfamiliar with that specifically. I'd be happy to talk with our chief up there, of course, Bob Yeager. I'll ask Deputy Secretary Mike Hancock if he's familiar with any kind of constraints that we have in that respect. I know we've been working. I was just up a couple of times with Senator Santoro and with other members, local officials, and so Mike, have you got anything on that?
Mr. Secretary, all I would add is that when it comes to traffic counts, if those counts involve our highway system, then obviously we're very much involved in all of the parameters surrounding those counts. But if you have a local development count that somebody is reaching out to us and asking us to do a count for, that's typically something the cabinet has not historically done. You know, it has to involve an existing roadway count. So that's our usual process.
My understanding is these are counts that are actually privately performed and reviewed as part of the overall development process by KYTC.
Okay. Those should still be happening, Senator. I'm not sure why they would not be.
Okay, and if you could take a look, and if there's any further questions, I'd be happy to put you in touch. And then the only other question I had, Mr. Chairman, is if you could please give us a little bit of an update on the opening of the Real ID office in Boone County. I appreciate that.
Well, that's one of the sites that I've visited, and as Senator Santoro, the chairman, is nodding his head, he knows that we are working on this, and we are, and the voices of those who are in local authority have been acknowledged, and we're working on it. We're not quite there yet, but I've just had conversations with the Education Cabinet leadership about the possible sharing of the space there.
Thank you, Secretary. I am a representative, so I enjoy being in the House of Representatives. So, thank you. Senator Higdon, you have a question?
More of a comment than a question. Secretary Gray, Deputy Secretary Hancock, and Robin, thank you all for being with us 2 days in a row. I know you have very busy schedules, and you paid a compliment about us being accessible, but I want to return the compliment that your team's been very accessible, and from Kenny Bishop to Mike Hancock and yourself, we've didn't talk to Robin a whole lot. I figured she'd be the bearer of bad news, so we gotta. But we are where we are, and we talked a bit about the delayed payments. We had that request from a lot of our contractors for you all to allow the delayed payment, so they could go on and do work and not have to lay anybody off and get paid later. That's not for everybody. Probably some contractors are not interested in doing that, but there are some that want to keep their crews working, and I commend them for that, and I commend you for making that work, and appreciate that. Back to, I guess, to another question. I do have a question. Hopefully, that you're looking at in the legislation, and when we pass the legislation about the transition from circuit court clerks to the Transportation Cabinet. We had a good discussion about that yesterday, but I just wanted to remind and make sure that you're looking at this as we go forward. And it was really especially important to a lot of rural communities that won't have a regional office. And, you know, there was talks about having a mobile office, mobile van that visited the counties. I want to make sure that, you know, that's still in the works. Also that, you know, an online capability for driver's license and so just wanted to make sure that, and that was kind of the discussions we had that was somewhat in the legislative intent that, you know, those small communities would have access either online or a mobile unit if, on a regular basis. So, are you still, those are still all in the works, hopefully?
Yes, sir. If you can see me, I'm nodding my head. As you know, Sarah Jackson reported yesterday on Real ID and driver's licensing and the relationship and the negotiations that we've had and the resolutions and things with the circuit, with the clerks and with the AOC. And we're moving forward with those plans. In terms of the mobile unit, we're still examining that in a very positive way. We've used benchmarks in other states, especially Virginia, to examine that. It's something that the governor's encouraged and others have encouraged. And we're still taking recommendations and suggestions in terms of locations. That is, while we have settled on a number of those locations, with the final count and the final locations, you know, we're still willing to examine that and examine geographies, you know, the travel distances and so forth. And Sarah is on it, on these issues. Those of you who know her know that she is persistent, determined, and she knows how to listen.
One final
Right ahead.
comment, Mr. Chairman. You know, we're all very excited that we got the reprieve on the Real ID, and that was moved out a year. You know, it really takes the pressure off of everybody from our constituents who were really still very confused about the difference between a Real ID and a driver's license, and the cabinet being ready. So that was, in this day and time of bad news, that was certainly some good news, that getting that extended to next year. So again, thank you all for what you do. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Let me footnote one thing. I failed to acknowledge one of your questions, Chairman, and that was related to the online renewals. We are continuing to work on that. There are opportunities for it. We know that the vendors that we're using are working themselves on this technology, and we're hopeful that we're going to get a green light on it. That seems to be, that's the sentiment, that's the sense among other states which are chasing the same, they're all looking at this application, which would be, as you know, would be a really good thing.
And Mr. Secretary, one other question that came into me yesterday, and I did send it over to Sarah, and she acknowledged that you all would look at it, but I wanted to just, I guess, pick your brain on it, or just say or relay the question. In some states and other states at AAA, a third-party vendor is also, I think in some states, are allowed to do driver's licensing. I don't know that would help us here in Kentucky, or a third-party vendor would be something that you might consider in the scheme of things, but did want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Senator. Sarah mentioned that you all had communicated about that issue, and we're looking into it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Hager, question? Go ahead. Turn your mic on.
Sorry, I got excited. First off, I want to commend Deputy Secretary Hancock. We had an issue about a bridge in Grayson County, and he was very quick to respond to me via text, so thank you for that. But I would like to hear an update on Bridging Kentucky and when you all expect those projects to restart. I know that several representatives and senators across the Commonwealth have had bridges shut down. And, you know, especially in Grayson County, our bridge is used for emergency medical services to get from one side of the county to the other. So any update on that would be much appreciated.
Well, I'll let Mike footnote and supplement what I am going to say, Representative. We have had we are examining the program as a function of our cash flow management model. And while we know and recognize its importance, we are also recognizing that the more commitments that we make at this particular time, at this particularly sensitive time, the more dangerous our cash flow condition could become. Now, all that has to do, though, with the timing and the letting of the contracts for consulting and then the right-of-way and utilities acquisition and the well, actually, for bridges, we're not in that, but it does have to do with the consultants, of course, and then the construction schedule itself. And I'll let Mike supplement that.
Yes, and Representative Hayward, as we look at the Bridge in Kentucky program, and when we first arrived back in January, we began to look at the number of expectations that were on the cabinet or on the table for the cabinet. We realized that Bridge in Kentucky in 2019 had a number of projects accelerated from future years into 2019. So we basically, when we put the highway plan together, just sort of took a time out for a moment. We didn't stop any projects that were actively ongoing. Every project that was in the Bridge in Kentucky program that was moving forward still is, but we're carefully assessing where we are on that program with the idea that we will continue Bridge in Kentucky and that we will continue to make those investments big picture long term because it's the right thing to do. We just want to make sure that we've got it properly managed moving forward. So,
Thank you. I appreciate you all not overcommitting on that.
all good.
Thank you. Any other members present here? Representative Harris, go ahead.
Can you all hear me? Thank you, sir. Hey, can you all hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
We can,
Just a brief question about penalties. I know you mentioned that some of our contracts had been suspended. Are we incurring any penalties as a result of those suspensions? And if so, what's the significance of them? How severe are they?
Representative Harris, good question. The good news is that we are not looking at penalties. The contractors are willing to proceed as Chairman Santoro said earlier, are willing to proceed because they want to keep their people, their employees working. And this is a model that had been adopted earlier in 2016. So we are able to have that precedent to work upon today. And so the extensions on payments are not occurring with penalties.
Thank you. Any members remotely? Questions? If not, no one else? Okay, so before we adjourn, members, again, please note that remote access will be allowed for all meetings during the 2020 interim. Members will be provided the information prior to the meeting on how to access the meetings remotely. And if the meeting materials are provided, they will be made available online for you to download. If any member did join us as we were in the process, please let us know if you are in your office or remotely. If not, we will be adjourning. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.